Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Linus Leo Lampe, the Triple L, and I am joined by my fantastic co-host, Edward Dempsey. Have any of you ever thought, the law is something I'd love to do. The law sounds like a great degree, but it's just all that reading, that writing, and I don't know if I garner the career I want out of it. Well, we have someone here today that's going to prove you wrong and is going to tell you about the absolutely fantastic opportunities and amazing experiences you will receive as a solicitor. Just before we begin, we've got a few things to say about Flamank Law Society. Over to Ed, who is the Vice President.
Flamank Law Society is an excellent society where you can learn about the career in the legal sector. We also do debating, moots and negotiations if you're interested in that. All great stuff to add to a CV or a resume. And for the small price of £10, you can be a member for the rest of the year and have access to any and all events that we run. Back to Magnus.
Brilliant. That's all for the promotions for now. As we are on a time limit, we've happened to choose the most, highly busy Australian lawyer that I know. So, Walter, do you want to tell us about taking a training contract in coronavirus? It sounds like a pretty daunting aspect and prospect to me.
Absolutely. So, hi guys, I'm Walter Myer. I'm a trainee solicitor at Clifford Chance. I'm currently sitting in my second seat with the litigation dispute resolution team. But for the majority of my first seat, as has just been mentioned, I spent in lockdown. In fact, it was actually pretty idyllic lockdown, to be honest with you. I was staying with a mate out in the Cotswolds. His parents have a cottage out there. So for sort of 5 out of those 6 months, really, I was in sort of bucolic English countryside, which for an Australian like myself was a real treat. So yeah, I mean, it was a strange time. I had 2 weeks starting in the office in sort of early March, which gave me a bit of an opportunity to kind of get to know people and put some faces to names and things. So it was, in a way, it was good timing because at least I had the opportunity to actually make those connections in the first place. But from that point onwards, we were kind of cast out as you know, the rest of the City of London and Canary Wharf were. So it did make for some slightly difficult circumstances. The workflow obviously was interrupted as well, and this impacted different departments differently. So obviously, in some departments, suddenly things became crazy. Employment, for instance, is linked with tax at Clifford Chance, where they share a sort of practice area, and suddenly employment was very busy because there were all sorts of questions around the furlough scheme that employers were concerned about, and so they were run off their feet. And then the tax team was busy in some respects, and in other respects, things were getting a bit quieter. But I think the real challenge was just being physically absent from the office. So when you can't be there and you can't make those connections and get to know people, it's quite hard to kind of, just to build those relationships and actually sort of start getting the work that you want to get into. So, I mean, that was a challenge. I think, one of the ways of addressing that, and in my case, I made sure to have daily, or if not daily, then at least sort of 2 or 3 times a week, calls with my supervisor, and we would just chat about different things. He's also a Melburnian, Melburnian. Went to my primary school and secondary school, as it happens. So
that's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it?
A bit of a coincidence. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if they planned this out, but there you go. So, we got along really well, and it was nice to sort of catch up with him on a regular basis. And
so, Walter, you talk about lockdown, which is really interesting, and basically being pulled away from what you envisioned as would be your career. Essentially office work in day to day, like 9 till 5, or for you, I'm sure it's like 9 till whenever. So we had a similar experience here at uni at March. Our dreams of a summer term doing our exams in person were basically crushed, and we were sent home to kind of lock down. Did you feel that this affected your experience as a trainee solicitor, or did you feel that you'd been kind of robbed of, an opportunity to get those initial steps in the workplace set up? And
a little bit. I think there is an aspect of that, and hearing about your experience as students to be robbed of that sort of the end of the year, those beautiful summer months. That's pretty heartbreaking, and it's a really fundamental part of being a student, being able to. I mean, obviously, exams being cancelled, that's not necessarily such a bad thing, but or being brought online, whatever they were, but absolutely those weeks and months after exams, or even just around them, where you can hang out with friends and go outdoors and do all sorts of things. Those are some of my happiest memories from uni, and I sympathise for your having lost those valuable times. But hopefully next year will be slightly different. In my case, look, I mean, you have to take what comes, and it's been a very strange time for everyone. I don't think anyone anticipated spending a huge chunk of this year working from home and under very sort of strange circumstances. But you're right, it was challenging, I think, just because I had come straight into the firm. As I said, those first 2 weeks were crucial, just to kind of get to know people and build some early connections. But all you can really do in those 2 weeks is lay some foundations, and it's then quite hard to even picking up the phone to people. You're quite cautious as a trainer. You don't want to kind of step on people's toes. You don't want to draw them away from tasks which are keeping them busy. So there is sometimes a little bit of inhibition to just pick up the phone and chat with people. And that was one of the challenges I felt I had to overcome. Hence, eventually getting to a position where I could speak really often with my supervisor, but also call up people I was working with and chat with them over various issues. Because if you're in the office, you would just go around to their room and you would chat with them.
Yeah, and the problem gets solved quickly. My dad, who's been working from home trying to manage, his team has had, terrible issues with internet connections, people going, oh, by the way, I'm on my lunch break now. Great, I'm in the Zoom call. I don't really have time to approve that or whatever. It becomes a bit tough. Ed, have you got any thoughts on what Walter?
Well, I just think it's quite interesting because obviously, even as a trainee solicitor, especially at a law firm as prestigious as Clifford Chance, you're obviously dealing with some quite highly sensitive work sometimes in regards to companies and obviously tax. But would that affected in the sense that you were limited in what you could do at home, as obvious? I imagine quite a lot of stuff has to be kept in office.
It's funny you should say that, because this mate I was staying with through a lot of lockdown is a trainee solicitor at Freshfields. And we sort of we did joke a little bit about having to maintain sort of Chinese walls in terms of what could and could not be said in various rooms of the house. But no, I mean, I think obviously there are certain cases in which you have to exercise precaution, and there are calls that I would take in a different room just to ensure that there were no breaches of privacy, and that my Freshfields competitors were not listening in. But no, generally speaking, that wasn't really an issue. Usually, we worked in different parts of the house, and could generally sort of be relatively open with sending emails and various things, right? So not too much of an issue there.
Was there any part of your work that actually suffered? Because you mentioned, talking about going on to the pro bono work. Obviously, did your firm start to prioritize things because of the circumstance, or was everything just transferred online to as it would be in the office? My sense was that things ran more or less as normal, just virtually rather than in person. On the pro bono front, I mean, that is an interesting example actually, because I'd signed up for a scheme called Free Law, which essentially involves providing advice at legal advice centres around London. And so I'd signed up at the Bethnal Green Free Law Centre. And had attended actually a couple of times before starting at the firm. I'd attended a couple of sessions just to kind of take notes on how solicitors and trainee solicitors give their advice in these sessions. So I was all geared up to kind of go along and help people out with housing disputes and debt claims and various other issues. But of course, with the lockdown, that then became impossible to do it in person. So that all went sort of onto phone calls and online. Which frankly was actually, the majority of the sort of client contact that I've had as a trainee solicitor
has been through this program, through free law. There's a few other pro bono projects I've been on as well, where you get sort of quite close contact with the client, whereas as a trainee in a lot of these matters, you're rarely the one who is at least leading the conversation with the client. You may be on the call, but you're certainly not the one kind of providing the advice directly. So I found it quite challenging, actually, getting involved in these sort of free law calls where you are advising a client, people you've never met before, without sort of, without being in their presence, without actually being able to kind of look them in the eye and reassure them and, look through documents they may have brought along with them. It does become a little bit harder. I found it was quite tough. And actually some of the cases that have come through free law for me were very challenging. So yeah, that was one thing which I found, the client relationship at some level, I think, can suffer if you're not sort of meeting in person. But as I say, that's something which I've experienced more through the pro bono side rather than through the
and talking more in specific about Clifford Chance, because unfortunately, due to programs like LA Law and Suits, most people watching will have this idea of what it is to be, a solicitor in a heavily corporate and competitive law firm. And they think, our Suits, no pro bono allowed. We're a money-making company, that our obligations to our paying clients. What's Clifford Chance's, stance on work such as pro bono?
It's very strongly encouraged. So in fact, there are targets set for solicitors at the firm. So I believe the target across the board is 50 hours of pro bono work per year, but strongly encouraged to sort of shoot well above that. So in particular, the department that I'm currently working in, the litigation and dispute resolution department, there's very strong support for pro bono work, in particular on sort of case management and advocacy. So for instance, I'm working on a case at the moment with the National Autistic Society, in which a family has come to us and the daughter was wanted to attend a certain school, and the school rejected her on certain grounds. And we are now supporting a claim to kind of overturn that decision and try to ensure that she gets access to the school of her choice. And this is something which, it is pro bono, but at the same time, especially for a trainee, it's a really good experience because you're actually, again, engaging directly with the client, which is very important and quite rare in some of these sort of larger matters. But you're also much closer to the detail of the case management and actually sort of making submissions to the tribunal and engaging with advocacy on the other side, with the advocates on the other side. So it's a really good experience actually to kind of almost run your own case, and at the same time hopefully make a difference to someone who's struggling. So that's something which is really strongly encouraged in this department, certainly. But across the board at CC, there's very strong engagement with pro bono projects of all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And
is it something that you actually specifically looked for when you were applying to firms? Were you like, pro bono is something I'd really like to help you, but I'd really like to gain that experience, or is it just something you fell into and have now grown accustomed to?
It is something I looked for. And actually, when I first, in terms of my journey to CC, so in my first year, I have a slightly unusual situation of having taken 2 undergraduate degrees. So I did my first undergraduate degree in languages, and my second was then a full 3-year undergraduate in law rather than the GDL. And in my first year as a law undergraduate, I was looking around for various schemes with law firms, and Clifford Chance offered what was then known as the Springboard scheme. These days is, I believe, called the Spark scheme. HR will crucify me if I get that wrong, but there you go. I think it is Spark. So the Spark scheme was a really good insight into the way that CC works. It basically provided summaries of all the different practice areas at the firm, and we were able to engage with a few different trainees and associates over lunchtimes and coffees and things. So it was a really good way of kind of getting a foot in the door and getting to know people. And there was a terrific session during that week on the pro bono opportunities at Clifford Chance. And I remember this guy speaking, and he just clearly had a real passion for sort of pro bono work, and he'd been involved in a number of different projects. And I found it really reassuring that people were able to, combine their sort of corporate law careers with very meaningful work in other areas, and in pro bono in particular.
But pro bono, if I'm not mistaken, is not the only thing that you've combined your law career with, because a source tells me that you're also on a special type of training contract where you're heavily involved in digital technologies and the future of that in law. Am I correct in saying that?
That is correct. That's right. So after this vacation scheme, I applied for the training contract and was made an offer at the end of my first year, which was terrific. It really sort of took the pressure off for the rest of the degree. Having accepted the offer, I was looking forward to starting at Clifford Chance, and then an email was circulated among future Clifford Chance trainees that there was this new scheme which was being put into place, described as the Ignite scheme. And I didn't really know what this was, so I got in touch with HR and asked a little bit about it. And while I think they had initially intended that it would start sort of the year after I joined, they were also looking for a few people who had already accepted training contract offers, who also had an interest in sort of the technical side of things to engage with it. So essentially what the scheme is it's a tech training contract. And it, that sort of can be manifested in different ways, and in the ways that you engage with your TC. So there are certain people coming onto the scheme with background in sort of data science and computer sciences, and so they have the technical skills. Then there are others who come in with perhaps less of that technical background, perhaps more of a background of having managed an app, or having even just sort of having extensive knowledge of relevant sort of trends in technology and the law, having done masters in the law of the internet or of other sort of modern technologies. So there are all sorts of different people coming from different backgrounds, and the scheme is still kind of taking shape, and we're still, I think the firm is still trying to sort of work out what it can do with this pool of very talented young people coming in and bringing very different skills to the table. In terms of my background and the reason I was interested in it, I mentioned that I studied languages in my first degree, and at the end of that degree, I took a course in computational linguistics, which I found really interesting.
Can you explain to the listeners what you mean by computational linguistics?
Computational linguistics, yeah, not an everyday term, is it? So computational linguistics essentially looks at the analysis of language through computational methods. So things like Google Translate, for instance, when you plug a couple of words into Google Translate and it automatically switches that into a different language, there are all sorts of processes going on in the background. I mean, it depends on how complex the algorithm is, but at a very basic level, it might just kind of run that search across it might run a search of those words across translated documents. So if it's got a database full of documents and you've just written the word hello in English and you want the German version of that word, well, it'll look at an English document with the word hello and look at how the German document translated it. Very basic. At a more complex level, you can sort of have full semantic and syntactic representations, which are kind of which are processed every time you sort of have those words translated. But this goes to all sorts of different applications. It's also speech recognition, for instance, is a classic application of natural language processing. And that essentially is the field. So it's working with language in ways which in computational methods.
So did that kind of push you towards this Ignite program, this digital combination with your career?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, at this point, when I studied that course, I don't think I was even convinced I wanted to go into law at all. Right. It was an area of interest in my first degree. And I then pursued it by doing some work on a sort of a summer scheme with an organization in Cambridge called Africa's Voices, the Africa's Voices Foundation. And we were running a really interesting project there in which we were analysing language from a database in Kenya. So that was a sentiment analysis task, basically looking at text messages that have been sent into a radio channel and deciding whether they were positive or negative in their tone. But yeah, so I mean, having worked on that project, having done a few other bits and pieces, and trying to sort of build up some basic coding skills, I just taken an interest in the area. So when this Ignite training contract became available, I obviously jumped at the opportunity to get involved in it. So that was kind of the route into it. In terms of what it's looked like for me over the last 8 months, it's been a couple of different things. So while I was sitting with the tax team, my main project was essentially working on building a database of tax cases over the last 15 years, roughly. So if you go online, you can find summaries of the results of tax cases from the first-year tribunal and the upper tribunal, and they summarize various aspects of the case, including the identity of the appellant, the identity of the judge hearing the case, the subject matter, whether it's VAT, corporation tax, income tax, and sort of often a sort of notes section, let's say, which gives a high-level summary of the case, including the result in the case. So what I was able to do was essentially go onto these websites, copy across some of this information, this publicly available information concerning the results in these cases, and use that to build up a database for internal purposes, which essentially, I copied through. It wasn't particularly complex. Copied through into
don't downplay it, Walter. Don't downplay it.
I don't know. I think anyone could have done this, but copy it through to an Excel document and perform different levels of analysis to then build a sort of picture of what's been happening in tax cases over the last 15 years. And so this ended up being across roughly 10,000 cases. I was able to sort of trace a line from the FTT decisions to the appeals in the upper tribunal, which is easier said than done. I'd sort of thought that they'd coordinate a little better, but given that they're sort of all part of the same system. But unfortunately, the summaries given by the upper tribunal, I give no reference back to the original case in the FTT. So that was a challenge in itself. But yeah, it was a really good opportunity to kind of get my teeth sunk into a sort of data analysis project, and hopefully one which will be of value.
I mean, we all know that the importance of data is constantly increasing. If you could describe what this Ignite program, like sell it in one sentence to viewers, what are the advantages on it? In one sentence, just sell why it's such a beneficial program, not only for Clifford Chance, but for someone interested in going into the industry of law.
Oh, one sentence is tough, but I think the legal industry generally is facing what is described as the more for less challenge. And I'm sure if you've been sort of doing your research into law firms, you'll have come across that turn of phrase. But technology is so important to the future of the industry. Technology both for internal purposes, making our processes more efficient, document discovery, e-discovery, all sorts of software to make our lives easier. And at the same time, technology in society at large is taking on especially high-tech industries like like the tech giants in the States, essentially. I mean, this is now a huge part of the work of a large number of top-end commercial law firms. So understanding technology both for its implications within the law firm and how we make our processes more efficient and more accurate, and then also understanding technology for the purposes of the work that we do and the clients that we work with is crucial. And I think for me, the Ignite training contract gives me the opportunity to kind of work on both sides of that question. And it's given me a great introduction to some people who work in tech within the firm. Again, both on the sort of processes side and also on the legal side. So for me, it's been a really good introduction into this sort of emerging world we find ourselves in the world of law.
Yeah, because
intriguing. I think Ed had
I was just going to say, obviously, I don't know if it's necessarily something that people equate the law and technology inside law, not necessarily looking at the legal sector, technological sectors through the law. So like AI in law, for instance, that's becoming a big thing where people are having AI to come up with easier decisions quicker. Do you think that that's a wholly good thing, or do you think that in the law there always needs to be that human touch where judges come to decisions based on rationality, which computers maybe at this stage anyway don't have?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what you're alluding to there, I think, is the field described as algorithmic justice, which is a particular application of AI in the legal context, and one which I've taken some interest in. I believe that in the long term, and I really think there is a long way to go, unfortunately, but I think in the long term there is a lot to be said for algorithmic justice. I think that one of the issues that we face in the English legal system today is access to justice. There's often a scarcity of funding, and often individual litigants struggle to sort of find the time and the means to go to court. And I think that issue could be resolved. If it were possible, it would be terrific to actually provide decision making sort of free of charge instantly at the point of use. And that's the promise that is the promise of algorithmic justice. Whether we can get there is I suppose another question. But I do think there are all sorts of interesting stats around this. I mean, there's the famous statistic that and I'm going to get this wrong, but all statistics are made up anyway. There's something like a 10% increase in favourable judgments after lunchtime. Judgments given after lunch versus before lunch tend to be more favourable. That's because
that's shocking. That's absolutely shocking.
10% may be a little high. I need to check my numbers on this, but there is apparently a statistically significant increase in the number of favourable decisions, and that is sort of a reflection on the judge having had something to eat and being in a slightly better mood, perhaps having a bit of a break.
It must have been a happy meal.
It must exactly. What these judges are reading, but what that indicates, I mean, it's one little data point, but it is indicative of something, which is that we think of judges as objective and sort of obviously very well reasoned and considered in their decision making, and they are, and they certainly aspire to that standard. But there are biases in all human decision making. And those biases can come from something as simple as whether you've eaten in the last hour, but they can come from more complex sort of structural views of the world as well. And those biases could be sort of on ethnic lines or on gender lines or all sorts of other possible biases that feed into judges' decision making.
Even if someone's having a bad day, it tends to affect their psyche in the way that they interpret situations. So I think that's we had an actual meeting at Truro Court. I'm sure Ed went as well. I don't know if I was in his group, where we spoke to a judge, and he just said, juries are ridiculous. We should not have juries. It's absolutely ridiculous. They're all going to be thinking different things. Some of them might have had a bad day. Some of them might have had a different experience with this type of person and then use that as a bias. He thinks it's absolutely outdated. But it's interesting what you're saying about technology, that they could even be applied to judges as well.
Yeah, no, juries, it's an interesting one. And of course, a lot of systems have sort of done away with juries in general, and they're being used increasingly scarcely, I think, in English law. But I think the value of the jury kind of lies elsewhere. I think the value of a jury actually is in the level of engagement it gives to ordinary citizens and members of the public with the legal system, an engagement which they perhaps otherwise would never have. So it's an interesting one. Whether it leads to better decision making or sort of more efficacious decision making, I think that's questionable. But I think it's actually an important sort of part of establishing civic duty within civil society, and giving people a better understanding of what the legal system is and why they should put their faith in it.
But do you think that duty is worth possibly getting a wrong verdict and possibly costing someone a lot of money or their life?
These are incommensurables, and I think it's difficult to weigh them against each other. I think that if the questions that the judge puts to the jury are are the appropriate questions, and then the judge can certainly guide the trajectory of the case in that sense. But you're right, there is a risk that the jury is persuaded of the wrong result, and the judge is sitting there tearing their hair out. So that is the risk that comes with it. But is it a risk worth facing for engagement with the legal system? Perhaps. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to quickly, I've got to do a quick advertisement, and then we're going to move on to some viewer questions and some word association, which would be brilliant. So I just want to say that, if you want to fight on the landing grounds, fight on the beaches, and have your say in a public place, the best place to do that is the Public Speaking Society, which is run by Emmanuel, Nana, and Patricia. You can find it on Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, whatever. I'm sure the links will be in the description and the end of the video as well. Please follow us on Instagram and YouTube to get the latest updates on the Verdict podcast. We are still here with Walter. Now, Walter, I've got a few viewer questions, one of which is, what is your favorite legal drama or TV show or film?
Okay. Well, since you mentioned Suits earlier in the program, I was actually it was my sister's birthday today, and I was my commute involves running up through the Isle of Dogs, and I stopped and gave her a quick call and showed her a picture of the building as I was approaching it, and she kept banging on about how it was just like what is it, Pearson Hardman? Is that the name of the law firm?
Well, it goes through many changes.
Goes through, well,
Inspector Lit.
You can tell how little of the series I've actually watched, but there you go. But no, so she was very, very keen on the building, and I quite enjoy a bit of Suits, but as I've just revealed, have not yet made it all the way through the series. So what
about your favorite legal film? Have you got any legal films that you'd suggest for someone as authentic as possible?
Legal film. I mean, I love Legally Blonde. Great film. Hell of a film. That would probably be my response there.
Excuse you, you're in my way.
She's a law student. She can't defend you.
Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruling 3.03.
See?
Brilliant. We've got one more question from something that's been sent in. It's essentially asking, it's written very poorly, so I hope they're not planning on being a lawyer, but they've asked, what is the advice you give to a prospectus law student?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there's all the sort of box ticking things. You obviously have to send the applications through, make the effort, try to work out what is sort of particular to each of the firms that you're applying to. Don't just run off a bunch of sort of cookie cutter applications. I think it is really important to make the law firms think that you've researched them and care about that firm in particular. Even if it is a slightly artificial exercise, it's one that you need to go through. But I think more broadly, in terms of developing yourself in the right ways and making yourself the best possible candidate for any of these places, people fixate on certain things and ask I really like, okay, I want to start a podcast. I mean, this is something I want to do, but I'm not sure it's relevant to a legal career. I really think actually whatever you do, whether it's starting a podcast or whether you're an athlete or a musician, whatever you do, if you do it to the best of your ability and commit to it and do the very best you can, I think that will impress law firms generally. I think you see so many people come through the door here with really interesting backgrounds and experiences and skills that they bring, and it's very rarely the case that they're just they spent their whole time at university just working on law. They've done a bunch of different things. They've shown commitment to different objectives and different sort of skill sets, and I think that really impresses people. And I think what comes with that actually is just the ability to speak with passion about something, and show your commitment to something. and you can then prove to them that you are a committed person, and can then, translate that commitment to a sometimes more than 9 to 6 job. So I think that's a really, really important sort of thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, sort of goes to the idea that no two applications are the same, but all of them have the same theme, that they're committed people to what they want from life.
Exactly. That's right.
That's brilliant feedback. I'm going to let Ed ask some final questions in a second, because I'm sure he's got loads of burning questions about the field of law. But I'm just going to do a quick word association round. Don't be nervous. We will edit out any slip-ups, I assure you. So artificial intelligence.
Computer.
Digital.
Tech.
Paper.
Cup.
Environment.
Law.
Jury.
Judge. Jury. It's got to be.
Accuracy.
Precision.
University.
Cambridge.
Trump.
Idiot.
Very, very well done. Very well done. Yeah. Brexit.
Wrong.
COVID-19. And finally, legacy.
Memory.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really good. That's the best association.
I feel boring.
No. Brilliant. We have had some slip-ups, but
yeah, we've had a few slip-ups in some of them. Just, sort of questions that obviously you did I think you said you did your first, like to comment, your first seat in tax, and then you're doing litigation at the moment. Do you sort of like know where you want to go in your career? Are you still searching for that specialized field that you want to dedicate?
It's a good question. So, and funny that environment should come up in the quickfire word association round, but I'm quite interested in sort of the environment and in particular climate change, and a lot of the pro bono work I've done so far has been sort of oriented in that direction, actually. So I'm intending to spend my next seat with the project finance team, which is essentially our sort of, they do a lot of work in energy projects in particular. So sometimes it's oil and gas, sometimes it's solar and wind. But I think for me, I would really value getting some experience in the sort of the energy sector generally. That said, I've enjoyed aspects of my time in tax. I've really enjoyed aspects of my time so far in litigation and dispute resolution as well. I'm actually sitting in the arbitration sub-team. And arbitration is essentially, there's different forms of it, but parties can decide to enter into an arbitration agreement under the terms of the contract that they've entered into. And on that basis, they can then have their disputes regulated by sort of a tribunal that they themselves select, rather than submitting themselves to the jurisdiction of England and Wales or a different jurisdiction. And it's an interesting area. It's very flexible. I think one of the things about litigation in England and Wales is there's a lot of formality to the process. There's a lot of sort of understanding what the relevant CPR guidelines require you to do. There's much less of that in arbitration. I mean, there are still procedures that you need to follow and still conventions that have arisen. But at the same time, it is a little more flexible. It's also very international, which for me, having been a languages student, having come from the other side of the world, is certainly an appeal there as well. So I'm really enjoying my time in the arbitration team, and it's one of the more competitive teams that could have a chance to qualify into, but certainly one that I'm interested in. Yeah.
Just a quick injection here. You mentioned the environment, and the first thing I invested in when I opened a portfolio was clean energy. What do you feel that the importance is of lawyers moving in the direction of the future with regards to specialization rather than the past? I think it's extremely important. It's a little difficult at some of these firms because a large part of the client base is in sectors which I might previously have disapproved of, or oil.
But I think actually in some ways engagement with those industries and with those businesses is really important. If we're going to make the changes that we need to make, the best thing that we can do actually is to engage with the businesses that are currently polluting most and try to sort of bring them around and assist them in their transition towards a sort of a cleaner future.
Did you hear about the news of Shell transferring from kind of the oil industry to a cleaner industry and rediversifying their workforce accordingly? What did you think of that?
So yeah, there's been a bit of movement on this front in 2020 from a number of the large oil and gas companies, especially in Europe. So Shell, BP, Total in France, all three of them have set relatively ambitious climate targets in the last year, and BP in particular has been making a lot of noises about. I think is it Mark Looney? I forget the name of the CEO. They're making very, very serious efforts to move towards a very different sort of structure and energy generation sort of platform. And I think that these are all very positive developments. And Clifford Chance, obviously, full service firm, so we do advise on acquisitions and developments of oil and gas fields, but at the same time, we're also providing support on sort of economic, social, and governance factors. I'm sorry, economic, environmental, social, and governance factors. So we do sort of provide that full service support and are able to help them with the transitions like the transitions we've seen as of this year. Now, whether that transition, I mean, cynically, you could argue that the part of the reason there has been the dramatic fall in oil prices from early this year, although the prices have rebounded a little bit. But these movements actually were starting probably well before that. And actually in the sort of the years before 2020 as well. So I think there have been some really positive developments this year. And I'm looking forward to working with the firm to kind of assist in those transitions and do what we can to take the largest emitters to a position where they're no longer emitting quite so much.
Well, it sounds like Clifford Chance is looking to be a firm of the future rather than the past, which is really great to see. I've got one more question, but I'm going to save it for the very end. I'm going to pass back on to Ed to see if there's anything else he wants to cover. Ed?
I actually think you've covered everything I sort of want. No, I'm a prospective solicitor as well. And actually, Magic Circle Select would be up there for me. But I just think it's good to know that there are ways to get into the law, and then you can do what you want in terms of like the environment at the bigger firms as well. Because obviously sometimes you may look at big firms and industries and not necessarily equate them with being innovators in certain areas because they're so steeped in history with other older firms. But it's good to know that you can go there and do pro bono or work towards creating a better world. I think that's something that's really good.
Absolutely. And I think, in terms of pro bono work I've done in the environmental space recently, so there was a project in which there's an organization which works with local sort of community energy organizations around the UK, and these are often organizations which band together and sort of bring funds together to build their own sort of solar panel or wind farm. So these are local community organizations which kind of are looking towards a greener future as well. And we then worked with another organization which supports the 50 odd community energy organizations across the country, so that they could enter into a contract with a developer to assist in some of the sort of the projects at hand. And so we were helping them draft that sort of service agreement. Which was, quite a rewarding exercise to be involved in, and will hopefully have a substantial impact on sort of community energy across the country. At the same time, I'm also involved in a group called the Chancery Lane Project. The Chancery Lane Project is essentially an organization which conducts green drafting. That's to say, they work with lawyers to build clauses which can be inserted into contracts, which will effectively hold the parties to account on certain matters. So perhaps, for instance, if they fail to meet certain environmental standards, then that could entitle the other party to terminate the contract or seek damages of some kind. So these are sort of, this is a particularly legalistic response to the climate crisis, but one that I've been quite interested in. And then perhaps lastly, the one that I've been involved in more recently in the arbitration team has been the campaign for greener arbitrations. And so this is a campaign which essentially seeks to reduce the individual emissions which results from, often arbitrators and legal counsel will fly all across the world in order to sort of conduct their arbitral hearings. And so this essentially provides a protocol and a commitment to reducing, among other things, air travel and transport generally. So printing costs, sending of boxes of bundles from one end of the earth to the other. So this is a new campaign which we're also engaging with at the moment. But there's a few different strands to it. Lots of ways to engage in these issues at Clifford Chance, and I'm trying to make the most of it.
I think it's really, really good that law firms allow for flexibility for people not only to follow what the firm wants to do, but also their passions. I think that's really interesting. I have one last question for you before we sign off, and it's Nicholas J. McBride defines law as a conversation about an ongoing conversation about what our society should look like. I have a question. As a lawyer, do you believe that you're part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, first of all, can I just throw a quick shout out to Nick McBride, who was a tutor at my first college. And when I decided I was going to apply for a second undergraduate in law, and had a quick chat with him, and he provided some very, very useful advice. So thank you, Nick. You are part of the reason I'm here today. So the question was, are we part of the problem or the solution in society?
And you personally, not like because I know there are loads of lawyers that every law is different, but you personally as a lawyer, do you personally feel you're part of the problem or part of the solution?
I think you need to look at these things sort of in the round. So, I mean, and we kind of have to define what the problem and the solution are here. I think the people in this building have a very valuable set of skills, which often save clients a lot of time and money. Perhaps then there are secondary questions as to whether the clients that we're serving are the right clients or are making the right impact on the world. And I think in that sense, I think it's important to be constantly critical and discuss and debate the sort of impact that we want to have on the world at large. I think to some extent, perhaps lawyers sometimes sort of see themselves as agents or sort of middlemen rather than sort of more dramatic agents in the scheme of things. But we of course have our role to play, and we obviously offer a valuable service. And in acknowledging the value of that service, I think we should constantly kind of challenge our preconceptions of what is acceptable and what is normal in the clients that we engage with. So look, I think that there's a real sea change at the moment in commercial law in particular, and in among companies across the world in terms of what people should expect from companies and how they should conduct themselves. There was, of course, the famous sort of business roundtable statement last year that it's more than just the profit to the shareholders that we should be looking at. There are all sorts of other considerations and stakeholders that we should be thinking about. And I hope that trend continues both in sort of the commercial realm broadly, but also in particular in corporate law. And I intend to be part of the force to keep that change moving.
Thank you very much for answering so truthfully and eloquently. I'd just like to thank you personally from the Verdict podcast and the Verdict team for coming in. This has been really beneficial to our cohort, I'm sure, when they do hear it. This obviously isn't live. I wouldn't put that pressure on anyone. But thank you very much. This has been fantastic.
Fantastic guest.
Yeah,
no
you've been great. Yeah.
No worries at all. It was a pleasure, and very nice to meet you both.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you very much. And have a good rest of the day. And I hope that COVID keeps you in the office and keeps you being part of the solution.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Give a shout out to Australians as well. I want to give a shout out to Australians and what they can do in the law. It's brilliant.
There you go. All right. Cheers, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, very knowledgeable guest, Ed. What did you think of the conversation we just had?
Yeah, it was great. It was very, very, very well spoken. I think it actually gave some very good insights into, we moved across many different areas, the tech and the law, sort of AI, all of that. But then we also moved to what it takes to be a good lawyer, what you can do as a lawyer beyond just being a member of a corporate firm like Clifford Chance, who might not necessarily be known as innovators in the environmental field or as getting pro bono to become a big force in their own. But I think that was really, really interesting. I think a lot of our viewers will appreciate listening to that. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think as an Australian as well, it was really enlightening to see, because you see in Australia we have the tendency to talk really fast. We talk really fast. We say a lot, and we don't stop. We don't even take a breath. But one thing I noticed with this guy, with Walter, is even though he was talking really fast, he was talking so much, it was hard to get in there. Everything he was saying was, precise, concise, and, really thought out. It actually sounded like he knows what he's talking about. I mean, I know from my cousins, blah, blah, blah all the time. But
doing languages at Cambridge might be a big factor in that.
Yeah, well, of course. Anyway, we have got to run, ladies and gents, because we are recording another episode. But we just want to say thank you very much for listening. We are the Verdict Podcast. We have to promote Flamank because they're, quite frankly, the best society in the world. You can get anything you need from Flamank. You can get anything you need from Flamank. You can get career prospects, you can get public speaking skills, mooting, advocacy, anything you need as a lawyer. It will equip you for not only a degree, but the future of your life. We just want to thank you again from the Verdict Podcast, and I'm just going to say a goodbye from me.
Bye.